September 11, 2001, is one of the most defining and tragic moments in modern history, an event that reshaped global politics, security, culture, and the collective consciousness of people around the world. On that clear Tuesday morning, the United States faced a series of coordinated terrorist attacks that claimed the lives of nearly 3,000 people and injured thousands more, leaving behind scars that continue to influence the nation and the world decades later. The attacks were carried out by 19 militants associated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda, who hijacked 4 commercial airliners and used them as weapons of mass destruction. 2 planes were flown directly into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both skyscrapers to collapse within hours and devastating Lower Manhattan. A third plane struck the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, the very heart of America's military operations, while the fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was heroically forced down in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back against the hijackers, preventing it from reaching its intended target in Washington, D.C., which many believe was either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. The sheer audacity, brutality, and precision of these attacks shocked the world, not only because of the massive loss of life, but also because they shattered the sense of safety that many Americans had long taken for granted. For the first time in modern memory, the continental United States had been attacked on such a devastating scale, exposing vulnerabilities that many believed were impossible in a country so heavily guarded and powerful. The events of that day unfolded with a surreal and horrifying speed. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and confusion spread as people initially assumed it was a tragic accident. 17 minutes later, at 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower in a fiery explosion broadcast live on television, making it undeniable that the United States was under attack. Panic, fear, and disbelief gripped not only New York, but also the entire country, as images of smoke, fire, and falling debris filled television screens worldwide. At 9:37 a.m., when American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, America's military nerve center, it became clear that these were not isolated incidents, but part of a large-scale, coordinated terrorist assault. Then, at 9:59 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The South Tower collapsed in a massive cloud of dust and debris, killing thousands of people trapped inside and rescuers working tirelessly to save them. At 10:03 a.m., passengers aboard Flight 93 made their courageous stand, sacrificing their own lives to prevent further destruction. Finally, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower fell, completing the destruction of the World Trade Center complex and sealing September 11th as one of the darkest days in American and world history. The immediate aftermath of the attacks was marked by chaos, grief, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. Thousands of first responders rushed into danger, many of them perishing as the towers collapsed. Ordinary citizens became heroes, helping strangers escape, offering water, carrying the injured, and guiding people through the choking dust that blanketed Lower Manhattan. Hospitals across New York prepared for waves of survivors, but the anticipated influx never fully arrived because so many had died instantly in the attacks or in the collapse of the buildings. Families frantically searched for loved ones, pinning pictures and messages of hope on walls and fences throughout the city. The smell of smoke lingered for weeks, and the ruins of the Twin Towers, later called Ground Zero, smoldered for months as recovery crews sifted through debris to find remains and personal belongings. The psychological shock was as devastating as the physical destruction. People questioned their safety in places they once considered untouchable, and the collective trauma was felt across communities, not only in New York and Washington, but throughout the entire nation and much of the world. In the days following September 11th, unity surged in the United States in a way not seen in decades. Americans gathered in vigils, prayer services, and memorials, offering support to grieving families and honoring the fallen heroes. Flags were flown from homes, businesses, and public buildings as a sign of resilience and patriotism. President George W. Bush, addressing the nation, vowed that the U.S. would not falter in the face of terror, declaring a war on terror that would define American foreign and domestic policy for the next 2 decades. The U.S. quickly identified Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, as responsible for the attacks, and within weeks, launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan to dismantle the terrorist network and overthrow the Taliban regime that had harbored them. This marked the beginning of America's longest war, one that would span 20 years and reshape geopolitics in ways still felt today. Domestically, the U.S. government established the Department of Homeland Security, implemented sweeping security measures like the Patriot Act, and permanently changed how people travel, with airport security becoming stricter than ever before. For many, 9/11s marked the end of an era of perceived invulnerability and the beginning of a world where terrorism was a constant threat. But beyond policies and wars, September 11th was most deeply about the human cost, the lives lost, the families broken, and the stories of bravery that continued to inspire. Nearly 3,000 people from more than 90 countries were killed that day, including office workers, flight passengers, military personnel, firefighters, police officers, and emergency responders. Each had a story, a family, dreams, and futures stolen in an instant. Thousands more have since suffered from health complications related to exposure at Ground Zero, and countless families live with the enduring grief of losing loved ones. Yet, amid the tragedy, stories of heroism shone through: firefighters climbing stairwells to rescue others, strangers carrying the injured, passengers on Flight 93 sacrificing themselves to save countless lives. These acts of courage stand as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable horror. The legacy of September 11th continues to this day, not only in the rebuilt Freedom Tower and the 9/11's Memorial and Museum in New York City, but also in the way it reshaped global consciousness. It sparked debates about security versus freedom, war versus diplomacy, and the responsibility of nations to combat extremism. It influenced culture, media, art, and literature, becoming a touchstone for exploring themes of loss, resilience, and identity in the modern world. For those who lived through it, the memories remain vivid: where they were when they heard the news, the disbelief of seeing planes crash into towers on live television, the sorrow of seeing the skyline altered forever. For younger generations born after 2001, the day remains a lesson in history, one that teaches about both the fragility of peace and the strength of unity. September 11th, 2001, was a day of tragedy, loss, and transformation. A moment when time seemed to stand still and the world shifted on its axis. It was a reminder that even the most powerful nations are not immune to vulnerability, but also that in the face of darkness, humanity's capacity for bravery, compassion, and solidarity shines brightest. The attacks forever altered the course of history, but they also inspired resilience, remembrance, and a commitment to ensure such horror is never repeated. As we reflect on the events of that day, we honor the lives lost, the heroes who rose in the moment, and the enduring spirit that continues to bind people together in memory and hope. To truly understand September 11th, 2001, it is essential to step back and examine the forces that gave rise to such a devastating attack. While that day seemed sudden to many Americans, the roots of the tragedy had been developing for years. Al-Qaeda, the group responsible, was led by Osama bin Laden, a Saudi-born militant who had become radicalized during the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s. In that conflict, bin Laden and other Arab fighters saw themselves as defenders of Islam, waging a holy war against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. They were armed and funded in part by US and Pakistani intelligence agencies, who saw the Afghan resistance as a way to weaken the Soviet Union. The eventual withdrawal of Soviet forces in 1989 reinforced bin Laden's belief that a determined band of fighters could defeat even a global superpower. This victory set the stage for his conviction that militant jihad could drive the United States and its allies out of the Middle East. In the 1990s, Al-Qaeda increasingly turned its attention toward America. Bin Laden's ideology was built on the belief that the U.S. presence in the Middle East, especially after the Gulf War of 1990-91, was a form of occupation and desecration. When U.S. troops were stationed in Saudi Arabia, the land of Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, bin Laden saw it as an unforgivable act. He declared America the far enemy, and issued fatwas calling for attacks on U.S. civilians and military personnel. Al-Qaeda operatives soon began to carry out attacks around the world, targeting U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, killing over 200 people, and striking the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer, in Yemen in 2000. These events were warnings, precursors to the devastation that would come the following year. Despite these signs, many within the U.S. government underestimated the threat. Intelligence agencies, including the CIA and FBI, collected scattered pieces of information about al-Qaeda's activities, but often failed to connect them. Reports circulated about suspicious individuals taking flight lessons in the U.S., about bin Laden's desire to strike inside America, and about hijacking plots. In fact, on August 6, 2001, just weeks before the attacks, President George W. Bush received a presidential daily briefing titled "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." The memo referenced patterns of al-Qaeda activity and the possibility of hijackings, but it lacked specific details about when or how an attack would occur. This lack of actionable intelligence left decision-makers unable or unwilling to grasp the magnitude of what was coming. In hindsight, historians and security experts often view these missed warnings as one of the greatest intelligence failures in U.S. history. At the same time, al-Qaeda was meticulously planning. The mastermind behind the 9/11's plot was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who had long dreamed of using airplanes as weapons. He proposed the idea to bin Laden in the late 1990s, and bin Laden approved it, providing funding and support. The plan was ambitious: train operatives to hijack commercial planes, use them as missiles, and strike key American landmarks to cause mass casualties and spread terror. Over several years, al-Qaeda operatives trained in Afghanistan, attended flight schools in the United States, and prepared themselves for a mission they knew would be suicidal. The hijackers blended into everyday life, some renting apartments in quiet suburbs, others going unnoticed in flight classrooms. Their ability to operate in plain sight underscored the challenges of counterterrorism. In a free society where civil liberties, privacy, and open borders were valued, the morning of September 11th was the culmination of years of planning, ideology, and opportunity. It was also the result of blind spots within the intelligence community and a tendency to underestimate the determination of non-state actors. The attacks were shocking in scale, but for those who had tracked al-Qaeda's movements, they were not entirely unforeseeable. In fact, several commissions and investigative reports later concluded that while the exact details could not have been predicted, the general threat of a major attack on U.S. soil was well known. This gap between knowledge and action became one of the most controversial legacies of 9/11's and raised profound questions about how governments should balance civil freedoms with security and how they should interpret and respond to threats in a world of shadowy, decentralized enemies. When the attacks finally came, they struck not only at buildings and lives, but also at a nation's sense of security. To the hijackers, this was a strike against what they saw as symbols of American power: the World Trade Center representing economic might, the Pentagon representing military strength, and either the White House or the Capitol representing political authority. To the world, however, it was an act of unthinkable brutality, one that would change the global order in ways no one could fully predict at the time.